Good evening. We're going to do a lot of show of hands, so I don't want anybody to be shy here, all right? How many people have operated QRP before? How many people operate QRP regularly? How many people enjoy operating QRP? All right, how many people are interested in learning more about QRP? I hope everybody's hand goes up. Okay. So even if you're maybe a little skeptical, there might be something here that makes you think a little bit differently about what this is all about. So my friends Bob and Dave, fellow members of the St. Louis QRP Society, are here tonight, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, why we do what we do. We're going to try to keep it on schedule, right? Don't want to go too long. But with time permitting, we'll have some time for questions along the way and maybe time at the end for a little discussion too. So without further ado, let me begin. The first step when you're using somebody else's computer is find the arrow key. There we go. All right. So the title of the presentation is The Joy of QRP, or Life is Not Too Short for QRP After All. All right, I already see some smiles and some snickers. You know who you are, right? You're the guy that walks up and says, life's too short for QRP. How many people have said that before? It's okay, you can admit it. Talk to a QRP guy, right? It's all right. We know where you're coming from, all right? So who are we? Already introduced. I have a difficult name to spell and pronounce, but it's been spelled and pronounced wrong and differently a million times. It's cool. Just Jeff, N0MII, all right? Jeff Logullo, Bob Pritchard, K0FHG, and Dave Gauding, NF0R. Dave's call is the one I always send by mistake because we've used his call so many times at field day. I think I know his call just about as well as I do mine, so we go way back. As I mentioned before, we're members of the St. Louis QRP Society. Ham radio is a big tent. There's a lot of different clubs and organizations around. If you're interested in anything you hear about tonight, we'd love to have you come to one of our meetings. I've joined this organization because there's a lot of neat things that are going on. Very interested in the Yesu activity with the repeaters, so I'll be monitoring that. But the QRP Society is a local St. Louis club. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but if you're at all interested in some of the things you hear about tonight, we'd love to tell you more and invite you to come visit one of our meetings. You know what? And I should have, before I do that, there's one other little piece. We're very proud of the fact we were founded in 1987. I had to look at my club badge. So we've been in existence for over 30 years. Dave is one of the two founding members of the club. So you can talk to him after the meeting a little bit if you want to talk to a piece of local St. Louis QRP history, right? And I'll make no secret about it. There's some things I'll talk about in my part of the presentation to kind of give a nod to some of the things that Dave has done for me as one of the Elmers. Yes, I did say Elmers that I've had in my ham radio development. Okay, so what is QRP? I already asked for a show of hands, so I know we all know pretty well what we're talking about. QRP is one of those ham Q signals, those three-letter shorthand abbreviations that hams use. We tend to use it when we're talking on sideband, right? What's your QTH? We almost do that without thinking as a ham. It's kind of odd that we do that because the shorthand of using those abbreviations comes from back in the days of sending with teletype, telegraph, right? Telegraph. The telegraphers are the ones that gave us the idea of using these three-letter shorthand abbreviations. So how many people know what's, say it if you know it, QTH, what's that?
Location.
Location, very good. What about QRM? Interference. All right, how many people operate QRO? Right, what's QRO? Yeah, it's high power. It's not what QRP is, right? QRP, strictly speaking, originally means shall I reduce power? Or you might be saying to the other guy, QRP, you can reduce your power because I can copy you just fine, right? Why would you want to do that? Well, what do we really mean when we say QRP? It's defined loosely is CW operation at 5 watts of output power or less. I say loosely because sideband there's a little bit of difference of opinion here, shall we say. Some people like the strict definition of 5 watts of power. Sideband works a little bit of a disadvantage because it's not quite as efficient at lower power as CW. So in many instances, people say, you know, we should call QRP operation for sideband 10 watts of output power, PEP. And you'll see some contests will allow 10 watts output for sideband. Others will say, no, you need to keep it at 5. So 5, 10, you know, just kind of, if it matters, if it's important, if you're in a contest, you know, follow the rules. If you're just starting to experiment with QRP and sideband operation, use whatever power you want, right? If you're used to working with 100 watts, back it down to 50 and see what happens. You know, you can start there. You can do this kind of in a stepwise experimental approach. There's also the category of what we call QRPP. That's very low power. That's less than 1 watt, or milliwatting, or microwatting if you really want to be bold and operate at maybe tenths of a watt. All right? So that's what we mean, strictly speaking, when we say QRP, or we're working at QRP power levels. But here's the real question. Why? So many of you raised your hands about using QRP. Why did you do it?
Because it's there.
Because it's there. That's a good reason. No, why do people climb Mount Everest? It's a hill to climb, right? Julie knows that. Somebody just got their license, right? Raise your hand over there. I can't remember your call. DCX. There you go. Cool. So I'm going to be asking you some more questions. You are very familiar with FCC Part 97, the guys that just took the test, right? Section 97.313, an amateur station must, it says must, use the minimum transmitter power necessary to carry out the desired communications. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. We probably don't always do that, strictly speaking, but the sense of what the FCC says is that we're probably gentlemanly obligated to use the power, and only the power that we need to do communications. What, Julie?
These late night nets, like I've listened on 40 meters and 80 meters on a single sideband, and you start having people talking about 1,500 watts, and people saying, you need, like they're saying, John, you need to crank that up to, get that big watt amp, that 5K kilowatt amp. You got 1,500 full legal limit, it's not enough there.
Yep, well.
And it's like, I was like, when I was listening to these guys getting goofy, and I was laughing so hard, I had to shut the radio off because I thought I was afraid of dying of laughter.
Luckily, that's right. Luckily, there's a big band and you can always go somewhere else. Those are people that are probably not operating in the spirit of this Part 97 regulation. No. But that's one of the reasons why you might want to operate QRP. Another one, and we'll hear a little bit more about that as we talk about some of the things we brought to show, is saving power. Now, I'm not talking about saving power in terms of, saving the planet or keeping your energy bill lower. Both of those things, I guess, technically speaking, we're doing. But it might be the case that you want to operate in a portable fashion, right? We love operating what we call park portable. It's a nice day on a Saturday. If your house is inundated with radio interference, right? How many people have turned on the radio and all you hear is that nasty static? Every wall wart that you have, right? The motor in your furnace, the neighbor's got a plasma screen TV. It's a nightmare.
I can see it.
There's no better pleasure than taking your radio to a park. The first time you turn it on, if you got a wire up in the tree and you turn it on, you'll swear your radio's broken. You'll hear nothing. Absolutely nothing. Until you turn and hit, and then, whoa, it'll knock your ears off, right? It's beautiful to take your radio park portable. So QRP, it's really easy to do because you can carry a radio, you carry a battery. That's all you need, right? Some people even like to use solar power. And if you're doing solar power for emergency purposes in your home, if the power goes out and you still want to be able to communicate, that's another reason. Less power means simpler gear. Now, I'm not going to disparage the shack station that you've got, big, heavy, it's very nice, easy to operate, big knobs, you flick it on, maybe you've got tube gear, it's great. But less power means simpler stuff. There's no more pleasure than I have when somebody asks me, why are you a ham? What do you do? Why do you do it? This is why I do it. Because you can carry something that you built yourself from parts that you bought at Gateway Electronics. You realize how lucky we are to have Gateway Electronics here in town, right? Buy the parts, put it in an Altoid tin, runs off a 9-volt battery, connects to a wire I throw up in a tree, and I can talk to somebody halfway across the country or across the ocean. You tell people that story, they're like, that sounds kind of cool, right? So that's fun. That, to me, that's one of the things that I like about the less power and simpler gear aspect. If you get interested in QRP, one of the things you'll probably find is you'll learn a lot about electronics. If you want to build a radio like this or put a kit together like that, you'll probably learn some things you haven't had a chance to learn in a hands-on way before. I was very excited to hear you got the Learn to Solder class, right? Why learn to solder? Build a radio. That's awesome. So
We had that in West County in the afternoon.
yep, well, you'll have to continue to have that. So that's another good reason to do QRP. If you're a contester, if you want to get some wallpaper on your shack, it's hard to beat the top guns. But you know what? There's a little bit little lower competition in the QRP category. The first time you enter your log in one of these state QSO parties, and a month later you get a message in the mail. Congratulations, you won first place Missouri in QRP category. It's like, wow, you know, I made 8 contacts, but I'm still the champ, right? It's really cool. So if you're new to contesting and maybe new to learning CW, it's kind of intimidating anyway, go ahead and give QRP a shot, because the thing about contesting, which is really cool, is if somebody hears you, they want to work you because they want the point. Right? You're not like working a pile up, but you hear somebody, you give them their call, they're going to they'll ask you maybe to repeat if you have to, but they'll work you. So it's a lot of fun. And I really just kind of stole my own thunder there. Why QRP in the end? It is fun. It's fun to do. All right, I already mentioned this. Life's too short for QRP. This bothers me, but kind of in a good way, because I know what people mean when they say that. They enjoy the investment that they've made and what they do with the hobby. Their view of the hobby is different from mine. That's okay, right? And by the way, I do have radios that operate QRP, but I also have an amplifier for one of them. So I can't operate at 100 watts. At times I do, right? So I'm not really rigid about that. The problem is I don't use it very often, but I do have it. Life's too short for a lot of things. How many people operate moon bounce? Anybody here do moon bounce? You know what moon bounce is though, right? Okay, look at there, see? You spend a lot of time with antennas and the equipment that you do. You're bouncing your signal off the moon. That's another thing I tell people, right? I tell them my story about building a radio that fits in your pocket, and then I tell them about these crazy guys that bounce their signal off the moon. That just floors people. That is really cool. I would never say life's too short for moon bounce, right? Life's too short for me for moon bounce, but not for you, right? Okay. Some people say life's too short for golf. I played a lot of golf, and you know what? The game has beaten me. So it's an interesting thing. Life's too short for some people for running marathons. How many marathon runners we got here? Yeah, God bless you. You know, that is an awesome thing that you've done. You've done it once. And training for it. It's not for me. My knees don't, they're not going to do it. But, you know, it to each his own. Life's too short for being a Cub fan, right? All right. So that life's too short thing, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a joke. It's really just kind of a matter of perspective. So I don't let that bother me too much. This is the big elephant in the room. You ready for this one? What's the big elephant in the room? Do you have to use Morse code?
No.
Do you have to use Morse code? Are you learning Morse code?
Oh, I do.
All right, see? And how long have you been a ham?
Less than a year.
This is the crazy thing, but it's really cool. I was just talking to a guy yesterday at a conference. I happened to mention that I'm taking the CW class. And he looked at me funny. He's like, you still use that? I thought you didn't have to anymore. I'm like, no, you don't have to. But you can read all the time about people who are becoming new hams and learning the code. Because, for a variety of reasons, it's fun. It makes it easy to do QRP operation. It's because CW is more efficient for the power that you put out in comparison to a mode like sideband or AM, which is even less efficient, right? It takes more, all things considered, it takes more power to overcome the signal to noise ratio so the guy at the other end of the path that you're operating on can hear you and intelligently tell what you're saying, right? So that's just the truth. Sideband, and one of the benefits of sideband is what skill do we all have to use sideband?
A microphone?
It's one that well, it's better than that. It's our voice and our ears, and to be able to hear and speak to people. Right? That's a skill we started learning at birth, and by 3 we were starting to get it under our belts, and by 5 our parents kind of wish we'd slow it down a little bit.
You know, the one thing I have never heard on a amateur radio in my entire life, I've never heard of AM contacts. I've never heard people talking on AM.
They are out there.
I swear to God, I've never heard.
They're out there. We'll tell you which frequencies and bands you can listen to that. So that's kind of, CW is here in the middle. How many people have operated FT8? Well, okay, life's too short for FT8. Nobody said that yet, but you kind of wonder. There are people who seem to be pushing this mode away or kind of making fun of it in some circles. I don't think so at all. I think there's a lot of people who maybe are getting their ham license because they hear about how this is working right now. Let's face it, the bands are not in great shape these days, right? It'll come back. I wish I hadn't taken the solar conditions for granted when I got in my ham ticket, because boy, that was a magical time. You could just pick up the radio and microphone anytime on 10 meters and talk to somebody around the world. It was crazy. So FT8, as opposed to sideband, where we all have the skills to be able to talk and listen to the other end, FT8 requires the skills that a computer and only a computer can provide. It's doing the listening and the decoding of what it hears. In fact, the signals can be so low you almost can't hear anything at all, right? And it has to be synchronized with the time, every 15 seconds and things like that. Very specific, very sophisticated, very, very power efficient. It's got like a 20 dB gain, performance benefit over CW, right? So it's much, much better performing in that regard. CW, FT8, you've got to invest in computer equipment, and somebody else wrote some really cool software to do that. Sideband, pretty straightforward, and it's very useful.
What's the FCC make the requirement to get your license that you had to understand how to use FT8? That would be a hoot.
It would be interesting. CW, how many people, I don't want to ask this question, but I would like to see, show of hands, how many people, let me say it this way, how many people enjoy operating CW? How many people have used it before but don't use it a lot? Okay, that's fair, all right? The good news is you can operate QRP with sideband. You absolutely can. One of the developers of the Elecraft radios does it all the time. He talks about it when he sends out his newsletters, talking about, you didn't bring a KX2, did you? What? You didn't bring a KX2? Just a KX3? May I lift this radio up? Sure. Okay. I'm not going to talk about it, but all right. This is the large Elecraft radio. The smaller one actually has a microphone built into it, and he uses it, pedestrian mobile on HF. It's crazy, but it works, right? You can do it. Ham radio is a big tent. There's plenty to do. That's what I always make sure people understand. This is not a fight. This is a decision. This is a smorgasbord of things you can do. And what I'd like you to believe is that QRP is a whole lot of fun. And if you're interested in CW, there's no better time than today to learn. I've been a ham since the mid-90s. And I wish I'd not learned CW the way I did, right? Did anybody learn CW by buying those code tapes from the league that at 5 words a minute? I'm still counting dits and das, I can't shake it. I'm 25 words a minute, but my brain is still like stuck in that ARRL mode. Terrible. You don't have to do it that way anymore, right? I've got some resources up here. I think you probably heard of many of them. If you're frantically taking notes, I think we'll have the ability to get these slides later. So don't worry about the URLs. I can even email them to the club later. Right now I'm participating in a thing called CW Academy. That is a free online group activity that's put on by a group called CW Ops. So you can go to that website, sign up, be put on a waiting list. Eventually what they'll do is welcome you into meeting for 8 weeks, twice a week, online, using Zoom. and you're basically in a conference with 3 or 4 or 5 other people on a bi-weekly basis, kind of practicing your code skills. And the beauty of that is you're working on CW without having to worry about the radio and the antenna and the SWR and the weather and the lightning and all that stuff. You're just doing CW. So it's really kind of cool. And it costs nothing. It's free. Very neat. This is a great website that's really good. Morse Tutor. Morse Camp is great for Morse drills. There's a bunch of apps that are available for Windows and the Macintosh and Linux. There's even smartphone apps, and that's another cool thing. You can have that anytime, like when you're driving in the car and you want to listen to some code while you're driving, get a little practice in that way. Maybe in the morning while you're shaving or something like that. It's very cool. There are also QRP Clubs. And I should have probably put St. Louis and Suburban Club here. Not because you have a particular focus on QRP, but it's part of what the club does. So just because I'm here talking about QRP tonight does not mean that conversation has to end. You've got a real good mentoring program, an education program, talking about soldering and things like that. So I see some kind of a groundswell potentially of QRP interest here. Last year, I visited your field day site. And I was very excited to see all the cool stuff that you had, but it was really late at night. I was heartbroken to see the CW station that was sitting idle. I wanted so much to sit down and operate. I might actually visit this year. But if you got a bunch of gear and a chance to work, field day is a fun time to work QRP. Anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. St. Louis QRP Society, that's us, local club. Glad to have some visitors. There's a regional club called the 4-State QRP Group. Membership to that is free. And they've got online nets and things and a bunch of really cool kits. North American QRP CW Club is what really fired my interest in the past few years of getting more active in contesting, oddly enough. There is an activity called SOTA, or Summits on the Air. Now, Summits on the Air, there's 2 groups of people. Guys called the mountain goats that climb up on a mountain anywhere in the world, including here in the United States, even here in Missouri. What they're trying to do is to make contacts to other people that are down in the shack sloths, they're called, right? So it's like a little mini expedition. So people will go out on a mountain, activate it. Because they're carrying all their stuff to the top of a mountain, they're going to be small battery-powered radios. In almost all instances, they operate QRP. And you can too and contact them. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. State QSO parties just got mentioned. The Florida QSO parties this weekend. I'll be operating that, QRP. Almost any contest has a QRP category. So if you're at all interested in contesting or just kind of getting your toe in the water, you can use QRP as a kind of a 2-hour session on a Saturday just to have some fun. And last but not least, my real ham radio love is field day. So our club operates all QRP, all battery power on field day every year. And we go 24 hours and usually have 3 or 4 stations active at any given time. We have done, last year we tried as a grand experiment, operating sideband QRP. Doesn't work well on field day. I'll be honest. I was cautiously optimistic. My expectations have been reset a bit. It's not that you can't do sideband on QRP, but field day is a bad time to do it because there's a lot of people and they like to work the strongest signal that they hear. The one thing category we've had some good success, I guess, for sideband and field day is on the 6-meter station. 6 meters, the magic band. When it's open, it's open. And if you can hear the guy, he can hear you. That's a lot of fun. So that's another thing I'd say. If you're interested in sideband and you're interested in 6 meters, there's some synergy there that can be fun. So if you've got a radio that can be on 6 meters, just flip it on and leave it on when you're in the shack. If you hear somebody, try working on QRP. You might be surprised.
Jeff, where's your field day located at?
Our field day is at a place called O'Connor Park. If you are familiar with Lambert Field, and when they put in the new runway, they had to take out a neighborhood, that's where we are. And the beauty of that is no neighborhood, no houses, no electrical noise. The only noise we have to cope with is the occasional Southwest Airlines flight taking off over our heads. Yeah, but that's what you got headphones on for. So, and we're always published in the field day directory that the league has on. So if you forget, but then you want to come on by, we'd love Love to have visitors. Yes, question.
Yeah, I like to tell a real quick story.
Sure, go ahead.
Casey's, BYE. Several field days ago, the paddles that he was working CW with were not working, so he disconnected it and did CW like this.
There you go.
Was it a Kier? Yeah. So, Victor is Mr. CW.
So not just low power. We're talking about zero equipment. Yeah. Who is that? Who did that?
Actually, there were like 3 keyers broken. One was battery and the other was broken mechanically, and that's what, so that was the only way to continue.
That's classic. Well, good for you. That's cool. That's a good story. Is there another question over here? All right. I think I'm just about.
What are the designated frequencies for QRP on CW on the HF?
I did not put that on a slide, but usually, well, for 40 meters, which is my favorite band, it used to be 7.040, but FT8 is, well, let me think about that. No, I don't want to say that. 14060. There's also kind of a novice thing that the 4 states group kind of congregates at 7.122. 14060, 7040, and 060.
I'd say 703 is more popular now.
Yeah, it's kind of pushed down.
Y has pushed the CW operators down a little in the band.
Yeah.
But you can always find QRP at 7.03.
You know, the reality is, imagine in your mind that elephant in the room picture, right? The reality is so many people have gravitated over to FT8. There's really, I think, a reduction in the number of CW operators that are on, which is a good and bad thing. I think in one sense it helps because a lot of people that are doing CW are relatively new, maybe a little slower speed operators. You know, it used to be that all I heard was code I couldn't understand because it was so darn fast. I think it's a lot easier to find people that work more at the speeds that newer people expect. So listen, there may or may not be a QRP frequency where you want to hang out, but really if you want to try QRP, just if you hear somebody, work them. I guarantee you, you'll have some success. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you do a Google search for QRP frequencies, it's pretty easy to come up with a chart.
You know those North American QRP guys, they have rallies and CW stuff all the time.
They do.
And they'll go 16 to 20, but if you send them question marks, they'll match your speed pretty quick.
Yep. Okay, here's the good, thank you, Phil. This is a good lead in. QRS, what's that mean? Please slow down, right? Nobody ever wants to send that. They're always really intimidated. Oh, I can't admit that I'm, just do it. We're nice, hams are nice people. And CW operators, generally speaking, are nice hams. So if they're sending stuff a little too fast for you, if you didn't get the guy's QTH, send back QTH question mark. He'll send it a second time. He doesn't know whether you got interfered with or maybe you got some interference or static at your end, whether you dropped the headphones or you couldn't copy. He doesn't know and he doesn't care. You ask for a repeat, he'll repeat. If you want him to slow down, please QRS. He'll slow down, trust me. Yes?
Another thing about that is most operators will respond at the speed that they're hearing. So don't send faster than what you can copy. If you
That-
send at a rate you can copy,
Did you hear that?
send that.
Great advice. Don't send faster than you can copy. And if you need to have the other guy slow down, you slow down, maybe even a little more than you think to kind of exaggerate a little bit. That's also good advice.
I have a hard time on the single sideband when they're talking too fast. I miss a lot of the letters.
Same principle applies. Just ask them, could you speak more slowly? You know, that can be very, very helpful. Okay, homework. You don't have to, but this is cheap and easy fun. How many people have used the reverse beacon network? Okay, this is pretty cool. The reverse beacon network is a bunch of volunteers that have radios set up with those software receivers, SDR dongles basically, right? So they're listening to swaths of the different bands hooked up to a computer. And it will copy you when you send your code on the air. So go to reversebeacon.net website. You got to dig in a little bit. You could read about it some if you want. Turn down your radio's power to 5 watts. Go ahead and do it, all the way down to 5. And if you've got a really old rig that doesn't have the ability to do that, there's usually an ALC connection on the back, and you can build a little circuit with a 9-volt battery and a divider. You can tell your radio, reduce your power. There are ways to get even some of the older rigs to do this. Turn down to 5 watts, then send this in Morse code. Test, DE, right? That means from. Test, DE, your call 3 times. And if you do that, some radios in the United States and around the world that hear you will then log the fact that they heard you to this website. So you basically set up a little search on the reverse beacon net looking for your call sign. You send your call sign out, and then in a matter of a couple of seconds, boop, 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 you'll see which stations heard you and how strong your signal was. It's pretty cool. Now, do it at QRO levels first if you want, and then move a couple, move your frequency just a little bit, cut the power down to 5 watts, do it again. You probably won't have as many people hearing you, and you'll see that the signal strength is less, but it's very encouraging to see that you actually have people that hear you. Now, okay, I know what some of you are thinking, oh, I don't think I could send that in Morse code. Maybe not by hand, but have you ever used FL Digi? Right? FL Digi can send this really well. So if you've got your computer hooked up to your radio, one of the things FL Digi can do is key your radio using CW. There's a myriad of different ways. Some radios can talk directly to your computer. You can type on the keyboard and send code that way. It doesn't really matter, and you don't have to be, I'm doing it manual purist, right? CW is just a digital mode, one of the original digital mode, right? So however you can or want to do it, send that with QRP power levels, see what happens. It's pretty cool. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about, kind of the introductory parts of stuff. Who has any questions about what I've talked about so far? Yes?
Just a comment.
Sure.
I think a lot of people, at least newer hams, don't realize when you go from 5 watts to 100 watts, that's 13 dB gain. That's 2 S units. So when you go down to QRP from your basic HF rig, you're already losing a couple S units. If you're copying a guy that's 5'9", 5'8", 5'7", 2 S units less is all it is. It's really not all that significant unless the conditions are horrible.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I didn't talk about, but you're kind of touching on something that's really very important. The amount of power that you're using obviously matters. Losses in your system, right? So if you've got cruddy coax or long lengths of coax, right? Or connectors that are not really soldered well and things like that, or an antenna trap that's got water in it or something like that. All those little things kind of work to your disadvantage. The other thing too is antennas, right? If you got a great antenna, you're going to have a pretty good signal. Jim Storrow, you got an antenna. I'd love to put a QRP rig on sometime. Man, he's got a beam on his house, and I've got wires in the tree. But I still have, that's the flip side of the story. I've just got junky wires in the tree. And when, I don't know, 30 feet. I got a 40 meter dipole, about 30 feet in the air. The ends are stuck in leaves, right? It sucks. I put it up 2 years ago, and I said, I'm just going to throw this up now. I'll take it down and waterproof it later. I still haven't done it, right? Shame on me. But you know what? I got 46 out of 50 states, worked all states QRP. 45. I got 5 to go. And Delaware is coming down in May 4th. Thank you for the tip, right? So, so the lesson there is a lesson I heard from that gentleman there, which is if you're always waiting for your antenna to be perfect, you'll never have fun in this hobby. It's never going to be perfect. Have the fun first, then do your tweaking, right? Have fun, try what, succeed sometimes, fail sometimes. If you're not sure if you can make it better, use a reverse beacon network to see if what you just did helped. That's kind of cool. But along the way, you're going to be learning stuff and having fun too. Okay, that's all I want to talk about. And now I'd like to turn over with a switch of the microphone to Bob Pritchard, K0FHG, and he's going to talk about all the cool stuff here on this table.
Put this in your pocket and clip
Just don't
this
push
on.
that red button.
Put the microphone up towards the...
Right there.
Perfect.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay. Name is Bob, K0FHG. I've been a ham since 1960. Got started at Kirkwood High School when I was 15 years. You go to Kirkwood High School? K0AZ, K0AZV. That's what. I think we met at a ham fest somewhere along the line, and I guess I built my first kit when I was in 6th grade. It was a hi-fi amplifier, and I got a Helicrafters receiver for Christmas one year, and I didn't know how to become a ham, but when I got to Kirkwood High School, the guys helped me there, and within a couple of months, I got started. Up until, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, I was probably mostly on sideband. I've worked CW all along, but 90% of what I was doing was probably in sideband. But I bought an HW7 that was all boogered up, and was able to fix that up, and found out that it was a lot of fun using that thing, and I took it up. My mother-in-law lived on the other side of the state. My wife had dragged me up there on weekends, and I didn't have much to do, so I brought along my little HW7, threw a dipole in my mother-in-law's backyard, and found that I was really enjoying using that little HW7. As far as QRP rigs go, that may be one of the worst ones ever made, if anybody's ever used one. And I went up to an HW8 and a 10 Tech Argonaut and so forth. But I still, was working at HF. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I was getting ready to retire, and my wife said, before we get too old, we got to move into a new house that's all on one story. Didn't want to do steps upstairs, so we moved to a new house, and I let her pretty much pick out everything she wanted, and we ended up with a house that's in an area where there's antenna restrictions and so forth. So I'm limited now to antennas in the attic. So I've got a whole antenna farm up there now. I got 80-meter antenna and a 40 and 30 and 20 and so forth. But I thought maybe my ham activities would slow down, but they didn't. I'm really kind of enjoying this new aspect of the hobby, and I've always enjoyed building things. And we're in a period of time right now where there is just a lot of stuff available that you can build and have fun with. And I get a kick out of making something and then tapping away and talking to somebody around the country or sometimes halfway around the world with a little radio that uses no power than a flashlight. And it just still amazes me. And I've really come to enjoy CW a lot. But I want to talk about a few of the radios that I've been building the last few years and having fun with. Jeff, you going to run the... Sure. Dave Benson is a real classic guy, one of the top guys in designing QRP rigs. And this is a classic little radio that he came up with maybe 20 years ago or so, called, the company he had, it was Small Wonders Lab. And this is the SW40. And it puts out about 3 or 4 watts, and you can buy these for 40, 20, 30 meters and so forth. And a couple of years ago, Dave decided to retire, and he I don't know if he sold it, but he passed on the rights to build that. And there's a company now that's available. It's called Midway Electronics, and you can still buy the kits from him. This is a kit I got from him years ago. This is the radio that this board is in this. I just built this for a ham friend who's kind of disabled, and I'm almost finished building that, so I thought I'd bring it along and show it to you. But one of the neat things about this one is it's got 4 crystal filters in it, so it's very selective radio, which is important, and it's very sensitive. It can hear about anything my K3 or KX3 can hear. It's rarely there's 2 knobs on it. There's a tuning control and a gain control. That's it. And plug an antenna in the back, plug your key in here, and your mic and your earphone up here. And compared to most of the modern rigs that have all kinds of buttons and menus and it's kind of refreshing just to have a radio where you turn it on and have one knob you're going to turn. It's easy to build. There's no surface mount components in it. It's full QSK, which you know what QSK is, full break-in, where the signal you're sending out is like transposed over what you're hearing. So you can hear the other guy if he's coming back to you in between your dots, and that's real important. Another neat feature of this is there's a guy, KU4QU, and he's come up with a study course, and it's great for new hams. And you take his course and you build this radio, and he goes through section by section. So you build the power supply first, and then you build the INI stage and the audio stage and so forth. And you learn what every component is as you mount it, and then you test each section as you go. So it's a very comprehensive course, and you build an inexpensive radio, and you got something you can use at the end of it. Now you can build it without going through that course. Dave puts out the new guy too, puts out a great manual if you just want to solder your components in and use it as is. Let's go on to the next one. This is another radio that was also designed by Dave Benson, and it's called the Hilltopper. And this is a kit that's put together by the 4 states QRP Club, which many of us belong to. We just got back a couple weeks ago from their annual convention down in Branson, Missouri. This has got a microprocessor in it. It's full QSK. It's got a super het receiver. It's got crystal filters. It's got iambic. You can use a straight key or iambic or mode A or mode B. It's got 1 or 2 surface mounts, but they're already mounted when you get this, so you don't have to worry about seeing those little bitty parts. And this is probably a 2-evening assembled, and it even comes with a little case, and it works great. It runs right at 5 watts, and all the jacks and everything are mounted right on the board, so there's no point-to-point wiring. It's got a DDS VFO, and it's got frequency readout. Now to get the frequency readout, it comes in Morse code. So you tap this button here, and it'll give you in Morse code what frequency you're on. And this thing, they also have, this is a 20-meter one, they're also a 40-meter one. And they're, what is it, $80 or something like that. So it's very, very economical. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, this is another neat little radio. And this one is called the AT Sprint, or ATS-3. And it was designed by a guy named Steve Weber, and he's another real icon in the QRP community. This radio is 5 watts. It works. It's got little plug-in modules if you want to change a band, about the size of a postage stamp. And it's got a microprocessor controlled, some memory keyer, and all that. So you've got a complete station, a pretty sophisticated station with a great receiver in it. And the ATS stands for Appalachian Trail. And Steve and Dave Benson both, they're also big backpackers and bicycle guys, and they go out into the boondocks. A few years ago, I ran onto a guy in Dayton. His name was Dennis Blanchard, and he hiked the Appalachian Trail. And he started out with a radio that he built himself, kind of, maybe the size of this radio here. And he had heart condition about 300 miles into it. So he took, the name of the book is 300 Zero Days. And when you're out on the Appalachian Trail, on the days you don't hike, you log it in as a 0. So that's where the 300 0 days are. But in this book, it's a great book to read, he talks about using the radio. Well, while he was recuperating, Steve Weber sent him one of these, which was much smaller. So once he got back on the trail, he used this radio, and it's got buttons on it. It's got menus and sub-menus and so forth to do all the little tricks that it does. It's a great little radio. And he's also retired, but he's turned all his stuff over to this Mountain Topper group, and you can still get that radio today as a Mountain Topper.
I worked Dave Benson once while he was out in his canoe.
Oh, yeah?
He was running the half watt.
He's a great guy. You know, he had a real job in this, but it just got too much for him, and then he retired. But he's with this QRP group down in Branson, and helps them design this stuff. So I see emails from him every day, and he's as busy as he ever was, I think. Flip on to the next one. This is kind of the pinnacle of the QRP. The KX2 and the KX3 were designed by the guys that originally were in the NorCal group out in California. And the first radio that they really came into prominence was the NorCal 40. And then the NorCal 40 developed into the NorCal Sierra, and then later Wilderness Radio took over that. And the original KX1 is basically a derivative of that original NorCal 40. But those guys then started their own company called L-Craft, and I had a KX2 and a KX3 and the K3 and the KX3. This thing is as sophisticated as any radio made. If you read the reports by Rob Sherwood, who's kind of the guru on receivers, it's ranks right up there at the top. I mean, the difference between this and the $10,000 radios as far as a receiver goes, there really isn't. This has got as good a receiver, and they're, of course, a lot more than this. This is maybe $1,000 or so for this radio equipped, but it's extremely sophisticated radio, and really it's kind of the gold standard now for the QRP radios. The difference between the K2 and the K3, the K3 goes 160 through 6 meters, and it runs 15 watts. The K2, which is volume-wise half the size of that, it's 80 through 10 meters, and it's 10 watts. Both of them have built-in antenna tuners. The neat thing about this is you can just plug this right into a laptop, and you got a pan adapter. Then you can set the radio on the other side of the room and operate the whole thing on your laptop. And it's great having a pan adapter, and you don't have to have any other interfaces or anything. You can buy one pan adapter made for it, but you really don't need one. And you can also buy an optional 100-watt amplifier if you want to boost the thing up. Okay.
Those also have built-in batteries in them too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of features. And you can put a key. They make a key, or there's other companies that make keys for those also. Okay. This is a really neat little radio. Here it is naked. It's called a QCX. And this radio, it started with a project in Europe where they get together kids for a summer camp, and they wanted a project for them. And there's a guy named Hans Summers, who's the force behind this thing. And he designed this for these kids to build at summer camp. And they decided after that they'd make it available to the public. This thing has got, you buy it for one band. This one's a 40-meter one, I think. It's got synthesized dual VFOs, a digital readout, RIT, preset frequencies, memories, all that kind of stuff. Build it for 80 through 17 meters. Puts out, depending on the band, 3 to 5 watts. It'll decode the CW for you. Assuming this CW is set and not too sloppy. On this readout, you can choose what your top row shows what frequency you're on. Then you can change the bottom to show a variety of things. It'll decode the CW, or it'll show you what's on your BVFO. It's got an S meter. It's got a full function keyer in it. You can use a straight key or iambic B or ultimatic. It's got a built-in key. You can also, it's got outputs on this. You can test the radio itself, or you can use it for external testing. It's got a built-in signal generator, a voltmeter, an RF meter, and a frequency counter. You imagine a few years ago, I mean, I paid $100 for a CW reader, $100 for a frequency counter, and, years ago. And this has got all of that built into it, and this thing sells for $49. It's just amazing. And they're coming in Dayton, coming up next month. They're going to announce a sideband version of this thing that's 10 watts. And there's going to have a 40-meter version and then an all-band version. And that's expected to be somewhere in the $150 range. So phenomenal what could be done. And, it's easy to build. This is probably, I built 4 or 5 of these things now for other people, and I've got 3 of them on my own. This is the same radio in a case. The case costs almost as much as the radio. I think the case is like $30 or something like that. But you can put it in your own case. But I've got a couple of them in my own case, and this is the case that they sell. It comes out of this case comes out of Germany. This is a worldwide project, and the ones it's interesting to see when one gets delivered. The last one I got was postmarked Sedalia, Missouri. The one before that came from Turkey. The one before that came from Bulgaria, and one of them came from Japan. But he's got people all over the world working on this project and getting these things. Okay, this is another one that's got 2 of them by these guys at HF. Was HF Systems, I think. There's a guy, VU2 ESE, that's the driving force behind it. This, you get a board, and the board's already built. All the toroids are on it, all the surface mount are on it. All you have to do is hook up the volume control, the tuning control, the antenna, the mic input, and the CW input, and it's got a digital readout.
In your own case, right?
You provide the case. This is an old modem I had laying around, and I just painted it and cut a hole in it and stuck the thing in here. This thing was made to be modified. The way it comes, there's a lot of quirky things about it, but you can listen to KMOX on this thing, and you can listen on down to 10 meters on CW and sideband. If you plug a key into it, it knows whether it's a straight key or an iambic key, and it senses it. It's a little squirrely on CW right now, but there's just all kinds of modifications. Everybody's out there coming up with mods of this thing, and that was the whole intent behind this, was it was made to be modified. But this is a 10-watt radio, sideband, CW, everything, for, I think it's $109 is what that sells for. This is the 40-meter version. This is a 40-meter sideband only. You can't even use this on CW. I guess there's guys that'll modify them, but the way it comes. This is my box I put it in. Again, it comes without a box, but this one is, I think it's $49 for a 10-watt sideband radio. So a lot of fun. Go on to the next one. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was on the air one day and I was talking to this guy up in Nebraska, and he came back and he said, the rig here is a Paraset. I said, what the hell is a Paraset? So he said, well, it's a spy radio, So I looked on the internet, and there's all kinds of stuff out there about these Parasets. And what they were used by the resistance, primarily in France and the Scandinavian countries, and they were parachuted in. Well, after reading about it, I found out there was a book about it. So I got this book. It's out of print, but you can find them on the internet, called Two Eggs on My Plate. This was written by a Norwegian guy, and he was in the resistance, and he wanted to do whatever he could. So he found about he could, if he could get over to England, he could go to spy school. So he sold his motorcycle, bought a sailboat, sailed over to England, almost got there. The winds caught him, blew him back. He went back to Norway. Submarines were chasing him, people were shooting at him and all kinds of stuff. But he eventually made it back to England. There they went to spy school. They taught him to fly an airplane. They taught him to blow up bridges, taught him radios, sent him back. They dropped him in with a parachute back in Norway. And this is the radio that those guys used. It's called a Paraset. With the para coming, meaning that they were dropped in by a parachute. So what these guys were doing was they were getting information from England, and then they were sending information back, you know, on troop movements and what kind of ships were coming into port and all that kind of stuff. People were chasing him around and shooting at him, and it's a great book. But it got me interested in it, and I found out that worldwide there's a group of guys that are building these things. So I said, well, I'm going to build one. So there's all kinds of stuff on the internet. Here's something I put. This is him over there hiding in his little tent up in the woods. And it's got all the specifications in it. The only Parasets that are out there now that are left were ones that are in museums. Most of them were destroyed after the war. But they took the schematic and measured everything from the ones in the museum, and these guys put together specifications on how to build it. So I started up at Dayton and other Hamfests scrounging up parts for this thing. And after a couple of years of scrounging, had all the parts, so I built a little box and put it together. So that one is pretty much as close as it could be identical to the ones that they actually used. And it's fun to get that thing out there. It's got a regen receiver, puts out about 5 watts. It's got 1-tube transmitter, 2-tube regen receiver. Regen receiver, one of the problems they had with those was the Nazis were running around and they could hear that regen receiver. So they were tracking these guys down and shooting at them and stuff. But I had fun putting that thing together. I was down at 4 Days in May, and there's a guy from, I think was he Nebraska or Iowa, that gave a talk about, he put together a group of 7 or 8 people in a club up there, and they all built these things together last year. There's no kits or anything to it. You just got to scrounge the parts and build it. But the 4 States Club put together their version of it, and they followed kind of the same basic architecture with a regen receiver and so forth. But this is all transistorized and on a board. And they sold it for what, 49 or 50 bucks or something like that. And I think you can still buy them. So I said, well, I'll make one of those too. But performance-wise, it's about the same. You still have the challenges of the regen receiver and the little couple watt transmitter. It's got a built-in key. And the box for this comes from that Hobby Lobby, I think. Whole lot that took a long time to build. That took like 2 evenings. So.
The average length of life was 15 QSOs for those guys in the field before they were killed. So.
But it's a great book if you ever want to read it. So is that 300 Zeros. I think that's about one thing I want to mention for you guys that like CW. Tomorrow, the St. Louis Telegraph Society has got a deal going where they're demonstrating their telegraph, and they're going to be at the train station in downtown Kirkwood, right on Lindbergh and right in the middle of downtown. And they're going to be there from, I think, 11 till 2. And they'll have all their telegraph stuff, and they'll actually be talking to other telegraph people around the countryside. It's kind of neat. They got them all lined up there, and they all have little Prince Albert tobacco cans on their centers, so they get different tones to it. It's a hoot watching those guys. So you're not doing anything tomorrow afternoon in Kirkwood, it'd be a neat afternoon activity. So, any questions, or you want to come twist the knobs on some of this stuff after? And I've got the manuals for all of them if you want to look at it.
What size batteries do you use in those little ones?
I use just a little bit, for most of these, I just use a little pin, AA cells. Now for the Paraset, that's a whole different deal. That's high voltage. But this one, this thing, actually, this one and this one will run on a 9-volt battery. This one has clips on it right there. This is another kit from the 4-States. I forgot to talk about it. But it's got a built-in key, 9-volt battery fits right here, hook your antenna here, your earphones here, and you're on the air. This is kind of a real inexpensive little kit. And the coils are printed on there. So you got one side of the coil on this side of the board, the other side on this side of the board where you get your coupling.
The 4-State QRP group built that radio this year. They built the 40 meter, I think.
Yeah, this is the 80 meter version, and they just this year came out with a 40 meter version, and it's it should take you about an hour to build this thing.
Mine didn't work.
Yours didn't work. Okay, thanks.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Pick your pocket.
Yeah.
Put that in your pocket.
And don't press the red button,
press the
right?
red button.
Okay.
Or else we have to come back next month and do it all again.
Yeah. By the way, if you get over to England, if you go to the Imperial War Museum in London, which is really quite a facility, I used to hang out there. I was in the Air Force 50 years ago. I would hang out down there on weekends when I could, just to go through the place. But they've got the radio that Bob mentioned there, the guy that wrote the 2 Eggs on My Plate, his actual radio in the museum. And it wasn't there 50 years ago, but it was 3 years ago. But it was really a kind of a thrill to see it. He was one of the people that helped Eisenhower make the decision to go with D-Day. He sent the weather reports in, along with other people, but he was very closely involved in that, so it's quite a piece of history. So with that in mind, Jeff asked me to do some antenna things tonight, and I do want to tell you that I've been a ham almost 40 years, so I think in 1982, I went to a suburban club meeting. Anybody in the club in 82? Okay. It was over on Manchester Road and Brentwood Boulevard. It was a tavern there, and I go in. Yeah. It was very quiet. I couldn't understand it. I mean, it's like right now, just people half the room was in front of the bar and the other half was at these tables, and they were making bootleg down converters for HBO, which had just come out, so.
You say HBO?
Yeah.
Oh, home box office.
Yeah. Probably before your time, but yeah. Anyway, it was interesting that a very dedicated group of hams, so. But I wanted to kind of touch on some antennas today in 3 different categories. One is indoor antennas. Anybody run indoor? Any cliff dwellers? 1, 2, yeah. We'll all be there someday if we last long enough to get in the nursing home or a senior retirement facility. And the other is portable antennas, which has been one of my hobbies for many years. And finally, magnetic loops, which I got into about 10, 11 years ago, and it totally absorbs my time now. But I was a cliff dweller for 15 years. So I touched on 3 different cycles, solar cycles, end of one, the next one and then a little bit of the last one. So I have no fear of using indoor antennas. How many indoor ops have we had over the years? Okay. I finally gave up counting. I worked 132 countries with indoor antennas, and not without some difficulty, but in QRP, DXCC with indoor antennas, so I'm not really afraid of it. But today, the homeowners associations are really becoming more prevalent with their effect, and you just can't throw up an antenna and then try to go and explain all the public service things you're doing. You know, people start rolling their eyes. So what I decided to do over the years was to take advantage of invisible antennas that are already in the house or close to it. And first thing is rain gutters. Wasn't Jim Glasscock a member of the club? Jim was my Elmer in 80 and 81. And I called him one night and I said, I'm trying to load the rain gutters. And he talked me through it, how to use the tuner and get it all set up. So made my first contact on a rain gutter with a fellow in Chicago. But it works out pretty well. In spite of what you might have heard over the years, you know, you hear, well, if it's okay until it rains, it'll make a difference. It still works just fine. Longest QSO I had with the rain gutters, I got in Italy on 80 meters with it. That's a long hike on 80 meters, but it's possible. The other thing that works pretty well, which is kind of unexpected, is window screens. You can load your window screens. Of course, it has to be copper. Today, everything is mesh, but in my time, I just grab on the screens and load it up, and there's enough capacitance in there and enough surface area where you can actually make QSOs. What really works well is screen doors, sliding doors. 40 meters is about as low as you can go on them, but you know, these antennas, nobody's going to know you're operating on them, and you almost get away with murder. So you don't have the HOA people on your back very much. To do that, you need a ground, and the best way to get ground is counterpoises. And I've helped people get on the air with grounds, and a couple other alternatives is to take aluminum foil and put it under carpets. Put screen under carpets, works pretty well. And all of a sudden you've got an antenna that really works, and again, nobody knows you're playing radio. When I started hamming, there wasn't a lot of cable TV, and looking through the room, I guess we all kind of, a lot of us in the same boat. So kind of lost my train of thought here for a second. Anyway,
Screen wire under the carpet.
Yeah, on the carpet. I ran counterpoises all through my house or through my condo where I started to operate. Counterpoises for me are eighth waves, because you lay a counterpoise on the ground or grass or a floor, it's going to change the resonant point. So I don't worry about a quarter wave counterpoise or half wave counterpoises. I don't worry whether they're running on the baseboard or on the wall, as long as they'll work. It's easy to put together, it's cheap, and you end up with a pretty good radio. The other antennas you can use are the attic antennas. You got to be kind of young sometimes to crawl around in the attic. I can't do that anymore. I had an interesting thing. We sold our condo to move to a house years ago, and lady wanted to buy the condo. It was a townhouse, you know, And what I had in the attic was from one corner to the other, it was a 20-meter dipole. And then that worked pretty well. And then I went ahead and added another wing on the thing. And all of a sudden I got on 40 meters. And then I had a choice. I could feed it against ground, against those counterpoises, and make a 80-meter antenna out of it. But turned out I added slinkies on the end, and I could run 160 in an attic that wasn't much bigger than a closet.
Or did you say this was a dipole?
Hmm?
Did you say this was a dipole?
Well, it was a tuned doublet, used twin lead feed line.
So you can get benefit by adding a counterpoint to a dipole?
It doesn't help dipole that much. Dipole's already balanced, so to speak. But it's a interesting way to play radio. Let me tell you, to work 160 meters in the space I was in was just amazed me. But anyway, I got off the track here. The lady wanted to buy the house, and she said she wanted to listen to University of Missouri had a classical station here. It was important to her to have that classical music because she liked to exercise to it. So she said, remember this is some time ago, she said, I said, well, bring your radio over, we'll try it. Well, she brought a boom box in, great big boom box. So I just hooked that antenna up to it, and of course, I think, was it KWMU came in just like it was across it. It sealed the deal on the house right there. She signed on the dotted line, so. But again, it's just playing with the system to make it work for you.
What happened when she tried to do the attic?
But you had tried to do what?
What happened when she tried to do raise the R value in the attic?
Yeah. I told her it was up there, and it was fine with her. But I tell you, whoever bought the house after she was there is probably, what in the world is this? You know.
What was going on?
Yeah. But anyway, it's possible to do that. But I just didn't want to give up. There's a lot of hams that I know that got a ticket, not a lot, but enough to be significant, that just never operated because they were just afraid to get on the air. Right now, I'm in a HOA restricted subdivision, but I talked to my two neighbors and I said I'd like to put a wire up in the tree, and instead of something in the attic, since I'm in a one-story house. And I called Jeff Logullo and I said, would you come over and help me? He's got an antenna cannon, you know, that shoots a device up in the tree. So I've got a 84-foot random wire up 55 feet as a sloper, and it works pretty well. It's
Or inverted V is another way to go.
yeah, it's a possibility, but for where I wanted to go, this is the way to do it. The antenna, you can hardly see it because it's 23 gauge magnet wire, which was made in Canada during World War II. Don't ask me how I ended up with it, but you've got to let the ultraviolet light get at it for about 6 months. You never see it again. But before that, it's shiny underneath that, all that enamel. But my neighbors have been understanding, and I have no problem operating. So hopefully, if you ever in that situation, you'll be able to do it. I'm going to jump into something more quickly now. I want to talk about magnetic loops because they're a good thing to use indoors. There's two here. This is a basic mag loop. This was a St. Louis QRP Society kit about a year and a half ago, designed by one of our members. It's the classic design. This is an LM 400 radiator, which has got a little bit of rigidity to it and helps keep it shape. If not, it ends up looking like a pear. There's a simple capacitor in here. There's a 6-to-1 reduction drive, and there's really not too much to it. The antenna itself, I forget the width of it or the radius of it. but the coupling loop here is not attached to the antenna, so it's just an inductive coupling. It's 20% of the value of this, the size of this loop, and it covers 10 through 40 meters. I know our cost for this kit was like $72, but you can build them a lot cheaper than that. The radio will cost you 20. The dual section capacitor, 365 times 2, with, you know, like the OEM radio capacitors, which you can still buy, cost you 20, 25 bucks. The rest of the money's in the connectors to keep the cost low. These are silvered. We got the silvered connectors from Greece off the internet. And it covers 10 through 40. It's kind of scary how simple it is and how well it works. But you can take this in your house, hang it in front of a window, which is a good place for it, or you can just use it anywhere. About 10 years ago, I saw this on the internet, and it was, I forget who it was. I sent them a couple emails, never heard back. That's a bicycle rim. They're 700 Cs, which is about 26.5 inches. It's the same as you see here. By the way, if you go and buy this commercially, 300 to 350.
I was thinking about 400.
You can build it yourself for, actually, if you scrounge, 50 bucks. And I can run, that runs 10 through 40. This also runs 10 through 40. This is kind of a strange thing to explain to you. But like I say, I played with these things for 10, 11 years. I got to know a fellow in Australia, VK5 KLT Lee Turner. And how much power? I don't know. I run QRP, so I can't tell you. By the way, how I got into QRP, just as an aside, I bought a Ten-Tech Century 21 from Ham Radio Center when it was on Olive Street Road. And I got home and I'm playing with it. And I operated for 2 weeks and I thought I was running 30 watts. I wasn't. I had it set at 5 watts. It was actually 4 watts. And a friend of mine came over and said, "What are you running QRP for on this thing?" So it convinced me I didn't need a lot of power, but that's how I got into a little power, and I get a kick out of it. You can get a bike rim at a shop. If you go to a shop and say, I want a bike rim, they got a lot of broken rims. People bring them in and get them replaced. And this one I got from a shop over in Manchester. I've asked for a few others. You can buy them a magazine for 20 bucks. You don't need the best. But it's amazing what they can do with this. So I played with them for 5, 6 years. I'd run 5 watts on them. I started running 1 watt. And then I started running half a watt. And I got down to about 100 milliwatts. And I could still work people on 20 meters. This will work 10 through 40. And what you do, you know, capacitors and series have the value. So to work 40 meters, I just use one side of the capacitor and just short out the other one. So I'm sitting at home and this thing's falling off of more tables than you can shake a stick at. And there's a DX contest on it. I was on 40 meters and I had 5 watts on it and I heard Bahamas. So I call a guy, bang, it's a contest. He comes right back to me. God knows what he had for an antenna, probably, you know, huge amount of aluminum up in the air. And I said, gee, I never figured I could work DX with this thing. That's what, 1,200 miles? So I had dinner, and after dinner I heard Columbia, stations in Columbia. I started to work them just like it was next door, and then a couple of the
Single?
Dutch islands off the coast.
CW.
Oh, see that, okay.
Always CW. Yeah, I've got a microphone. I just don't know where it is. So anyway, that's kind of a fluky thing. It was mentioned this reverse beacon network. Bob had mentioned, I think Jeff too. I can pop up on some of the overseas stuff on 20 meters with just that loop there. So it's something to consider. Thing is about reverse beacon network, the other night I had like 10 or 12 hits. And I looked at it and gee, that's not, it's always the same stations, these skimmers, you know, they volunteered to keep their stations on 24/7. But it all happened within 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes. So this whole QRP thing is kind of hit and miss once in a while. But if you want to have some fun, just sit there and play with QRP on this reverse beacon network, you can have a pretty good time of it. So we're getting late, aren't we?
We are, we're really close.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you touched on the most important thing I wanted you to say, which was the waiting for your antenna to be perfect. Don't wait, have fun. And that's what Dave told me, that try this, you know, and he kind of got me to try some things that I was maybe a little bit too shy about. So I'm always grateful for that. So we've kind of gone maybe a little over the cutoff, and I apologize, but I hope this has been maybe enlightening, a little inspiring. Somehow we'll figure out how to get the slides or the URLs so that if there's anything there that you want to see, we'll get that for you. Here's our names, calls, and email addresses and our website to slqs.net. So if you want to do any kind of follow-ups that way, we'll be happy to answer any QRP questions. So,
Yeah, if you want to come over to a QRP club meeting sometime, after the meeting, sometimes we'll go out and just fire up in the parking lot. And we can do the same thing here tonight if you're really curious. But it's amazing what you can do.
Because that's our computer.
Oh, there you go. Very good. All right.
Right.
It's got that one solved. Any other quick questions? All right. On behalf of
Thank you all.
everybody here, thank you very much.